So often we're approached by clients who have been looking for years and years for their dream self-built plot, and they've really struggled to find anything. And sometimes the best plots are right under your nose, and are usually attached to an existing house. So if you're looking for a self-built plot, either to downsize into to create your dream sort of family home, or if you've got the need to have two houses next to each other, so you've got an elderly relative you need to care for, then often this can be hiding away at the bottom of your garden. And to illustrate that, I'm going to talk you through a project that we completed a few years ago. This is in Sheffield, right on the edge of these beautiful allotments, and our clients are really looking for a house that they could move into and have space to build a new build for their parents to move into. And so they approached us with this house, and we went to see them on the initial viewing and supported them with that process to check that it would be suitable. And they bought this farmhouse with this long, narrow garden, and this bit at the back. Here was a big kind of waste ground. There was a few discarded bits of garden furniture, loads of scrappy trees and brambles everywhere. And it looked pretty unpromising because it was long and narrow, and we had the overlooking from these properties here. These semis all had windows that looked out onto the site. So you might stand there and go, well, where's the house going to go? We're just going to feel like we're on display all the time. But through some careful design moves and some really good negotiations with planners, we developed a concept which dealt with the overlooking and allowed us to build a house in the garden, a 3-bedroom house with plenty of insulation. It was super insulated, really thick walls, an amazing kitchen, living, dining space with loads of natural light, despite the fact that we were really limited on where we could put windows. So we couldn't put any windows. I guess first thing we did, to take it back a step, is we sunk the building down into the ground slightly, which reduced its impact as you looked at it from the allotments. And actually, as you come down the hill over here down this road, this appears almost like one of these little tin sheds in the allotment. So it sits really nicely on its site, and it also reduces the impact on the views of these houses. And the next thing that we did was we looked really carefully about where we could and couldn't put windows. So we really focused the windows on either end of the house. There's no windows on the sides here, and there's no windows on the sides here. And you might think that would feel really dark and dingy. But actually, because we've designed it really well, and we've put in lots of roof lights, and we've also created this single-story extension, the downstairs has windows on 5 sides of the building, so it feels flooded with light. And then upstairs, the main bedrooms have each got 2 really generous windows, and the 3rd bedroom's got a gigantic skylight. So generally it feels really light and spacious, and that meant that we could put the house there and actually have no impact on the privacy of these existing houses, which is usually a key concern of the planners. The other things that we needed to think about was the kind of pattern of development. And sometimes you might have a garden, but if you're going against the grain of what's around and you haven't got a good justification for why the house should go there, it can be really difficult to show the planners that this is actually an appropriate thing to do. This is quite an unusual place to build a house. You wouldn't normally expect to see one behind some other houses, and you might write this site off as not being suitable. But actually we found a really strong kind of narrative, which is a fancy architectural word for a good story about why this was appropriate. And that was about thinking about the allotments next door. Not thinking about the character of the farmhouse or the sort of 1950s semis, but thinking about all these really interesting sort of slightly dilapidated sheds, and thinking about this being another shed in the allotments, and this being this kind of stone wall, and there was a few stone walls littered around the site. And then the other thing that you need to think about is the space. Does the site have enough space? And whilst this was quite a big site, it wasn't massive. We really had to squeeze the house in, and we went right to either boundary with the walls. But one of the ways that we made the most of the space was by using this idea of these 2 kind of courtyards at the front and the back. And whilst that doesn't necessarily give you any more garden space, it means that your house is much more connected to the garden that you do have. And so it does feel like it's much bigger because you can see the garden from different points of view. It's not just a kind of flat elevation and you're looking out over the same garden every day. You're looking at the garden from different points all the way through the day. And also the other thing that we did was we made the most of the long views that we could have over the rest of the allotments. So you can kind of look out from one of the bedrooms and you can see, I wouldn't say for miles, but certainly for sort of hundreds of meters. So it feels like whilst you're in the middle of the city, you actually could be in the middle of the countryside. So that's one of the other sort of tricks that you can use. And then the other issue that you might come up against is trees. And obviously trees are really important to health and happiness, particularly in cities. But not all trees are created equal. And it's important that when you've got a tricky site like this, and when we came, there was lots of scrappy trees around the outside of the site here, that you get a tree survey done by an arboriculturist, and you understand the health of the trees and their contribution to kind of wildlife and sort of amenity value, so how nice the place looks. And what we did on this site was actually, although there was lots of trees around the outside, which you might think would block development, they were all kind of very scrappy, self-seeded trees that had just been kind of not really planned, just sort of because the site had been left empty for so long. They'd just kind of grown up. Many were of a very poor quality, or to be honest, had diseases that needed to be taken out. And we kept the most important trees on the site. So this big oak tree here, and actually the clients have got an incredible tree house in this oak tree, and I'm incredibly jealous of it. We had to make sure that we placed the building outside of the root protection area. So the root protection area, that is basically about the size of the tree's crown, so where all the leaves are. And that gives you a good indication of where you can and can't build. If you need to go into the root protection areas, there are ways, and working with a really good arboriculturist and a good architect can help overcome that. But generally we're trying to locate development outside of that, and we've had many occasions of building on really sort of densely treed sites and still managing to squeeze some house in. And the other thing to think about is that when we did this project, this was completed I think in 2017, and the planning regulations have changed a lot since then. So now we have something called biodiversity net gain, and this is a really, really good planning policy that requires any development to show that it's actually improved biodiversity on the site and not harmed it. So actually when we would approach this site now, we would also have to take into consideration the ecology on it at the minute. We need to get an ecologist to come and do a survey, and then we would need to make sure that the building allowed us to also increase the biodiversity by about 10% is what they're aiming for. So that might require us to keep more trees than we did when we did this project, or it might require us to put in other measures, so like hedgerows and ponds and wildflower meadows. All these sorts of things help to improve biodiversity and are things that we need to consider when we're developing sites like this. Whereas if the site was more urban and it was just a bit of tarmac, we wouldn't need to consider that in the same way. So definitely something to consider, trees and ecology, and understanding the constraints is a really good first step. So that's where we always start off. Before we start doing any design work and getting out our pens and pencils, it's actually understanding what are the constraints that we need to work around, because that's going to give us a much better chance of getting planning when we come to submit the application. And the other thing that's really important to do is to work with the planners. So sometimes when an idea like this is a little bit non-standard and it goes against the grain, just chucking a planning application in and hoping for the best isn't the right strategy. It's much better to work with an architect who's really going to work with the planners and bring them along on the journey. So often we see clients that have worked with someone who's just bunged in a quick site plan and gone, here you go, please approve my house. And the planners, they can't really respond to that. There isn't really anything for them to do other than give you some quite negative feedback. What you need to do is you need to tell the story of why the house is appropriate, how you've considered all of the planning constraints like overlooking, overshadowing, access, parking, all of these things. And also allow them some time to feedback. Let them have a bit of a stake in the design, because that means they're much more likely to approve it when the time comes. And using that approach and actually using some diagrams like this, taking a little bit more care and effort in the information that you present to the planners, or some really nice 3D sketches that can really help to sell the planners on the vision and get them on board. And despite getting objections from every single one of these neighbours, we were able to get this approved without having to go to planning committee and on the first attempt. So it just goes to show that by taking a really carefully considered planning strategy and working with an architect that knows how to work with planners on these difficult sites, you can really maximise the potential of even really unpromising sites like this one.